What's up, guys? We're back with another educational video, and this week we're looking at a new meta-analysis and meta-regression examining the effects of different training volumes and frequencies on strength and hypertrophy. But first, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment for the algorithm. All right, so shout out to my powerlifting coach, Zach Robinson. This meta-analysis and meta-regression was published by him and some other people in his lab, Jake Rimmert, Josh Pelland, and this comes out of Michael Zordos' lab. Mike Zordos, good friend of mine, somebody who I have respected and followed for strength and hypertrophy research for a very long time and does excellent work. They were looking at a meta-analysis, which, as you guys know if you followed me for a time, that is a study of studies. So you have certain inclusion criteria, and then you look at what does the consensus of the data say. And they did what's called a meta-regression, which basically you can use statistical modeling to look at, is there some sort of dose-response relationship between the variables you want to examine and the outcome you're examining? What was cool about this meta-analysis and meta-regression was it was one of the first ones to examine a nonlinear model for strength and hypertrophy in response to volume and frequency. And they quantified volume a little bit differently than some of these other meta-analyses. So they use what was called fractional volume. In some of these studies, it's difficult because if you do a chest press, you can count that as a set for your chest, obviously, but do your triceps count? Do your shoulders count? Because they're not primary movers, but they do get quite a bit of stimulation from that movement. And so the way they did this was on an exercise where a muscle was the primary mover, one set was one set. But if it was a secondary muscle or an ancillary muscle, it counted as a half set. And they examined this versus the old model of just doing basically binary, either a set or no set. And they found that this actually was more accurate and fit better. Now, they also did this for strength as well, not just hypertrophy. So for example, whatever exercise they were testing, like let's say a back squat. Obviously, 5 sets of squats counts as 5 sets. But then if they did 5 sets of leg press, that would still count as 2.5 sets because it's not the exercise they directly want to measure, but it does involve the prime movers of that exercise that they are measuring. Now, what did they find? Well, they found some really interesting results. For hypertrophy, frequency didn't seem to matter very much, but there was a dose response for hypertrophy, and they didn't really find a cap. So they found a dose response up to like 43 sets per week for a muscle group. Now, that being said, they did see diminishing returns. I think they found that the minimum effective dose was like 4 sets a week if you wanted to get like noticeable hypertrophy. And then you got a bigger response going up to like 10 sets and 15 sets, and then it started to really taper off. But you still got increased benefits going all the way up to 40 sets per week for a muscle group. It's just that by the time you got there, now you're dealing with more and more incremental gains. So we haven't found like really a hard cap to hypertrophy in terms of volume, but practically there'll be a cap because, I mean, good luck doing 40 sets on every single muscle group. I mean, ain't nobody got time for that. Now, for strength, they actually found diminishing returns at far lower volumes. We're not really sure why, and one thing that's important to keep in mind is most of these studies were not using low reps like you would use if you were a powerlifter. Most studies, the minimum reps was around like 7 or 8, and I think the average was like 10 to 15 reps. So who knows if this would have been different if they had lower reps and were doing like more powerlifting specific training. They found that really like around 5 sets per week, you got the vast majority of the benefits, and past that, you didn't really see a whole lot of benefit. But what was interesting was while frequency didn't seem to matter much for hypertrophy, hypertrophy did favor more frequency. It just wasn't a big effect, and it's questionable whether it was statistically significant. But when it came to strength, strength seemed to clearly favor more frequency. So even though the volume seemed to cap out lower than with hypertrophy, much lower, frequency actually seemed to have a bigger effect on strength. Now, why might that be? Well, I think there's some really practical answers here. One, if you have more sessions, you're getting more practice. And let's say you had 8 sets of squats that you distribute across the week. And in group A, you do 8 sets in one day. In group B, you do 2 days of 4 sets. The 4 sets in 2 days are likely going to be higher quality sets each time because you're more rested and you're not dealing with as much fatigue as you get into those later sets. Whereas if you're doing just like one day of 8 sets, by the end, you're probably dealing with quite a bit of fatigue, your form's going to break down, it's not going to be as high quality of a set. Now that being said, this research is still very much in its infancy, and I talked to Zach about this, and we both kind of had a chuckle about, what the hot takes are going to be from this, which is basically volume doesn't matter for strength, just do a lot of frequency, like 1 set every single day for the movements that you care about. And then for volume, people are going to have hot takes on all different ends because this gets very much debated. But I mean, we have so many studies and meta-analyses now that even if you don't need to be doing 40 sets a week, you don't obviously need to be doing that much, unless you want to be like the most muscular human you can possibly be and you have all the time to do it. But all the meta-analyses are pointing in this direction. More volume certainly doesn't seem to have a negative effect on hypertrophy, and in most cases, it favors more hypertrophy. If you're doing 40 sets on all your body parts per week, that's going to be practically very, very difficult. Now, where do I think this stuff can be useful is I think it can make sense to volume cycle. So you take, say, a 12-week period of time, and let's say you really want to focus on your arms. Well, then maybe you could do like 4 days a week of 10 sets or 3 days a week of 15 sets on arms and cut back your training on pretty much everything else so you can increase your overall recovery capacity. And then once you get through that training period, you can go to maintenance because we know that you can cut your volume down by around 1/3 and still either maintain or make small gains. So you could then cut your volume to 1/3 of what you were doing previously, or probably even more than that. And you could pick a different body part to focus on during that time. So that might be a practical way that you could implement some of this stuff. And if you are a strength athlete, maximum strength is something you care about. It seems like you probably ought to have multiple sessions per week of that exercise that you want to get stronger at. That's kind of what we know right now. And I'm sure this will evolve over time and we'll get more answers in terms of, more specific dose responses. But I thought this was a really, really cool study and very, very well done. And obviously, we need more of this kind of stuff because it's going to be very instructive in terms of how we make recommendations for optimal hypertrophy as well as minimum effective dose. If you don't know what to do with your training, you're listening to this and you're like, what does that even mean? Check out the Layne Workout Builder. There you can find all of our evidence-based training templates. We'll take the guesswork out of it for you, but we still leave it flexible enough to where you can select different exercises based on what you prefer and have access to with equal effectiveness. So make sure you click the link in the description and check out all my evidence-based programs there, and I will catch you guys next week.